Vanakkam, good afternoon. There is a tradition in IIT Madras. Once we see that the seats available are full, the students and those, ladies and gentlemen, friends, will begin the 2-day Tamil Nadu Economic Policy Dialogue now. Towards that, I request our chief guest for this afternoon, Mr. Bibek Debroy, Chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, to please come on to the dais. Thank you, sir, for responding affirmatively to our invitation to take part and deliver the second P.V. Narasimha Rao Economic Development Memorial Lecture. Second, we have another distinguished guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran. He is the Dean of the IFMR Graduate School of Business at Kriya University. Thank you, sir, for sparing your time. We request you to join us on the dais. And third, most importantly, our co-host with Tamil Nadu Young Thinkers Forum, the department, the dynamic and vibrant Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Madras. To represent that, Professor and Head Umakant Das sir, please join us in the dais. He's handheld us from last year. We had the dialogue for the first time last year, and this is a second continuous dialogue. Now, we have with us Ms. Supraja, who will do the invocation. May I request all of you to please stand. We will do the Tamil Thaivarthu as well as a Tamil song as invocation.
நீராறும் கடலுடுத்த நிலமடைந்த கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் வதனமென திகழ்பரத கண்டமிதில் தெக்கணமும் மதிர் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரிந்தனரன் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இறந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே சீரிலமை திறம் விழுந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே 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 நெஞ்சுக்கு நீதியும் தோளுக்கு வாழும் நிறைந்த சுடர்மணி பூன் 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 பஞ்சுக்கு நேர் பல துன்பங்களாம் இவள் பார்வைக்கு நேர் பெரும் தீ பஞ்சுக்கு நேர் பல துன்பங்களாம் இவள் பார்வைக்கு நேர் பெரும் தீ வஞ்சனையின்றி பகையின்றி சூதின்றி வயகமாதரலாம் வஞ்சனையின்றி பகையின்றி சூதின்றி வையகமாதரலாம் தஞ்சமென்றே உரை பேரவள் பேர் சக்தியோம் 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 தஞ்சமென்றே உரை பேரவள் பேர் சக்தியோம் 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 நம்புவதே வழி என்ற மறைதனை நாம் இன்று நம்பிவிட்டோம் நம்புவதே வழி என்ற மறைதனை நாம் இன்று நம்பிவிட்டோம் கும்பிட்ட நேரமும் சக்தி என்றால் உன்னை கும்பிடுவேன் மனமே கும்பிட்ட நேரமும் சக்தி என்றால் உன்னை கும்பிடுவேன் மனமே. அம்புக்கும் தீக்கும் விடைத்துக்கும் நோவுக்கும் அச்சமில்லாதபடி, அம்புக்கும் தீக்கும் விடைத்துக்கும் நோவுக்கும் அச்சமில்லாதபடி, உம்பர்க்கும் இன்பர்க்கும் வாழ்வு தரும் பதமும் சக்தியோம் சக்தியோம். உம்பர்க்கும் இன்பர்க்கும் வாழ்வு தரும் பதமும் சக்தியோம் சக்தியோம். வெள்ளை மலர் மிசை வேத கருப்பொருளாக விளங்கிடுவாய். வெள்ளை மலர் மிசை வேத கருப்பொருளாக விளங்கிடுவாய். தெள்ளு கலை தமிழ்வாணி நினக்கொரு விண்ணப்பம் செய்திடுவேன். தெள்ளு கலை தமிழ்வாணி நினக்கொரு விண்ணப்பம் செய்திடுவேன். எல்லத்தனை பொழுதும் பயனின்றி இராதென்ற நாவினிலே, எல்லத்தனை பொழுதும் பயனின்றி இராதென்ற நாவினிலே, வெள்ளமென பொழிவாய் சக்திவேல் 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 சக்திவேல். வெள்ளமென பொழிவாய் சக்திவேல் 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 சக்திவேல். நம்புவதே வழி என்ற மறைதனை நாம் இன்று நம்பிவிட்டோம். நம்புவதே வழி என்ற மறைதனை நாம் இன்று நம்பிவிட்டோம். கும்பிட்ட நேரமும் சக்தி என்றால் உன்னை கும்பிடுவேன் மனமே. கும்பிட்ட நேரமும் சக்தி என்றால் உன்னை கும்பிடுவேன் மனமே. அம்புக்கும் தீக்கும் விடைத்துக்கும் நோவுக்கும் அச்சமில்லாதபடி, அம்புக்கும் தீக்கும் விடத்துக்கும் நோவுக்கும் அச்சமில்லாதபடி, உம்பர்க்கும் இன்பர்க்கும் வாழ்வு தரும் பதமும் சக்தியோம் சக்தியோம். உம்பர்க்கும் இன்பர்க்கும் வாழ்வு தரும் பதமும் சக்தியோம் சக்தியோம். வெள்ளை மலர் மிசை வேத கருப்பொருளாக விளங்கிடுவாய். வெள்ளை மலர் மிசை வேத கருப்பொருளாக விளங்கிடுவாய். தெள்ளு கலை தமிழ்வாணி நினக்கொரு விண்ணப்பம் செய்திடுவேன். தெள்ளு கலை தமிழ்வாணி நினக்கொரு விண்ணப்பம் செய்திடுவேன். எல்லத்தனை பொழுதும் பயனின்றி இராதென்ற நாவினிலே, எல்லத்தனை பொழுதும் பயனின்றி இராதென்ற நாவினிலே, வெள்ளமென பொழிவாய் சக்திவேல் 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 சக்திவேல். வெள்ளமென பொழிவாய் சக்திவேல் 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 சக்திவேல்.
Friends, we'll jump straight into the agenda for today. But before that, just a quick one line on the objective of this dialogue. We wish to enable and enhance mainstreaming economic thinking in the state. Towards that, we also wish to bring together various experts in the field of not just Tamil Nadu's economy. Of course, we'll discuss Tamil Nadu in detail tomorrow, but as well give us the larger pan-India picture. That's why we had Dr. C. Rangarajan last year giving us that pan-India picture when he elucidated 25 years of liberalization. Today we have Mr. Debroy, who's going to elucidate taking stock of economic reforms, P.V. Narasimha Rao and beyond. His Holiness Dalai Lama always says, when you talk, you often repeat what you know. but when you listen, you learn something new. We want all of us here, including the organizers, to listen keenly and intervene accordingly to the speakers here. I request to start with Professor Umakant Das to welcome the gathering.
Respected Dr. Dev Roy, Dr. Nageswaran, other dignitaries of the dais, my dear colleagues and young friends, it indeed gives me immense pleasure to extend a warm welcome on behalf of the Institute and on my behalf to second P.V. Narasimha Rao Economic Development Memorial Lecture and the second Tamil Nadu Economic Policy Dialogue. The Department of Humanity and Social Science is proud to be associated with the Tamil Nadu Young Thinkers Forum in hosting the Memorial Lecture and the Policy Dialogue. While delivering lectures on economic development and liberalization, we always highlight the role and contribution of the late former Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. If the country is inching towards becoming a $5 trillion economy by 2024, and under the astute leadership of PM Narendra Modi ji, and it's partly because of the economic and foreign policy introduced by the then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. History will always remember Narasimha Rao for providing leadership to the country at a time of deep financial crisis and bringing a paradigm shift in the economy. When he took over as the 10th Prime Minister of India in 1991, the condition of the economy was very bad due to the balance of payment crisis, the unprecedented devaluation of the rupee, and mortgage of the gold. To mend the situation, India indeed needed fiscal discipline to dismantle trade barriers and remove licenses, permits, and anti-monopoly laws that bound domestic industries, which he did. His bold decision to introduce economic reforms at a crucial juncture helped the country to withstand global crisis. He was instrumental in delivering the ordinary Indians the taste of economic freedom and giving the sense that their dreams could soar with free-spirited ideas. He unshackled their bondage to the system and brought limited government intervention and interference. He also gave educated mass a chance to pursue private employment and change their lives for the better, an era where talent could command earnings and the ideas could be seeded in a business. There can't be a better time than this to organize such a memorial lecture. On the one hand, the economy is growing at a faster rate of 7 to 8%, except the last few quarters, of course, aspiring to become a $10 trillion economy in the next 8 years, while on the other hand, it seems like crisis is brewing within the Indian economy, a general acceptance of downturn and tougher times for us to. I'm sure the distinguished guest of honor, Dr. Nageswaran and Dr. Vivek Dev Roy, will take trips to their memory lane and share their impressions of the personality and policies of late former Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. With these few words, I welcome you again to the beautiful campus of IIT Madras to take part in the two-day dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Dash. It is indeed an honor for us that in a minuscule way, enabled Mr. Dev Roy's first visit to IIT Madras. This is his first visit to this legendary institution, and we are glad that we have contributed in a minute way. Now next I invite Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran to address the gathering. He has also assured us that he will introduce Mr. Dev Roy and lead into the second P.V. Narasimha Rao Economic Development Memorial Lecture. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, friends. This is an event organized by the Tamil Nadu Young Thinkers Forum, so I have to at least say a few words in Tamil, which is Ungal ellorukkum ennoda anbana vanakkangal. I think, as he put it, this has been a great opportunity to invite Dr. Vivek Dev Roy to IIT Chennai campus. Like all of you, I'm also very keen to listen to him because one of his greatest strengths among many strengths that he has is to be able to distill complex economic issues and concepts in simple terms for us to not only understand but also go to the crux of the problem or the challenges so much so that at the end of the lecture, we will feel as if we all have become very knowledgeable economists, and that is his strength. So therefore, I wouldn't want to stand for too long here between all of you and him. I think in a way, even though this event is part of the annual Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao Economic Development Memorial Lecture, and the topic given to him is taking stock of economic reforms, P.V. Narasimha Rao and beyond, I think it's actually in a way good, because in this world of WhatsApp messages and Twitter, India is facing its first economic slowdown after these social media applications have become prominent. So much so everybody has become an expert in trying to come up with answers for the economic stimulus, economic slowdown. And if only the number of messages exchanged in the social media applications can be converted into an economic stimulus package, we would already have solved the slowdown problem. That is the kind of, what shall I say, hyperventilation that is going on among various WhatsApp groups, etc., on the current economic slowdown. And I think those of you who know Tamil very well would have heard this paramuri from your elders. Arasa maratta suttitu adi vaitha thottu paaka koodadu. Illaya? So governments may be able to take measures, and they will take their time to have impact in the economy. Economy doesn't function like an electric switch where the moment you turn it on, the light comes on. It doesn't work that way. What we can ask for, correctly and rightly so, is that the government be alive to the problems that the rest of us face. And I think in the last month or longer, that messaging we have received unmistakably and amply from the government, that it is now seized of the issue. And in fact, it is a good sign that the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has been reconstituted with Dr. Debroy continuing as its chairperson. And some new faces have also been introduced, which is a good thing. And as we all have observed over the last 3 to 4 weeks or longer, the Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, has been coming out with announcements which address both short-term issues and in the process also address some of the long-standing issues that the economy is facing. And most of you might have heard that a crisis is too good an opportunity to be wasted. And it is often said that countries undertake economic reforms and structural changes only when there is a crisis. It is not just true of countries, it is true of individuals. It is true of ourselves. We make lifestyle changes only when the doctor tells us that, things are going to be very difficult for you to continue in this fashion. Then we make changes. Until then, we are either in denial of the problem, or even if we accept the problem, we simply say, it is not yet reached any crisis level, so let me continue to stick to my habits. So habits die hard. That is true of individuals, that is true of institutions, that is true of governments as well. So a crisis in that sense is a welcome opportunity to do stock taking, to do what we call spring cleaning, to liquidate wasteful investments and wasteful ideas, and to bring about long-term behavioral changes that will keep us going for the next 25 years. So that is what Prime Minister Narasimha Rao did. He used the crisis of 1990-91 balance of payments, when India had a shortage of foreign exchange, to meet its external debt obligations, and used that opportunity to usher in some of the changes which Indian economists themselves had identified earlier in 1989 and 90 as being necessary to move the economy forward. So it was not an economic reform package that was implemented because it came as conditions attached to the loan that India took from International Monetary Fund. These were changes that were felt, perceived as necessary and essential by our own economists, which Dr. Manmohan Singh implemented under the leadership of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. So right now, we should be using this opportunity of the current economic slowdown to bring about some of the changes, because we have spent more than 28 years since the major economic reforms of 1991, and subsequent governments have moved them forward in their own way, in their own pace, 2 steps forward, 1.5 half step backward, etc. We have moved forward, and that is why today we are in a position, even though for some people it might appear as somewhat far-fetched to talk of a $5 trillion economy by 2025, etc. So in a way, therefore, this is the most apt opportunity for us to listen to Dr. Debroy, not only on the broader sweep of history of the last 30 years, but also in his view, and he has been articulating it in many of his op-eds and speeches elsewhere, what needs to be done, what needs to be contemplated. For example, just as in the geopolitical or political sphere, the government took the step of abrogating Article 35A of the Indian Constitution, using Article 370 as a lever. Dr. Debroy, in one of his articles, has also talked about considering taxing agricultural income at least beyond a certain threshold, and he spoke about this whole issue of what is considered to be tax terrorism, which is a widely used phrase, and he had addressed that very beautifully and lucidly in one of his recent essays which I read. So therefore, I think as you all are, I'm also very keen to hear his thoughts on the not only the current state of affairs in the country, but also on what it would take for this government or this Prime Minister to do a repeat of what Dr. Narasimha Rao did by using the 1991 crisis as an opportunity to undertake far-reaching economic reforms. So with that preamble, it's my pleasurable duty and honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Bibek Debroy to you, who of course, even though it's very cliched, but it is true that he needs no introduction. He is an economist. He was educated in Ramakrishna Mission School, Narendrapur Presidency College, Kolkata, the Delhi School of Economics, and then Trinity College, Cambridge. Presently, he is chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. He is the president of the Indian Statistical Institute as well. He has worked in academia, worked in policy making, worked in think tanks, in Presidency College, Kolkata between 79 and 83, at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade between 87 and 93, as the director in a Ministry of Finance UNDP joint project on legal reforms between 93 and 98, at the National Council of Applied Economic Research between 95 and 96, then at the Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies between 97 and 2005, the Center for Policy Research between 2007 and 15, of course, when the Planning Commission was dismantled and it was renamed as a new initiative for transforming India, Niti Aayog. He was one of its early members. From January 2015 to June 2019, he was member Niti Aayog. And of course, as many of you know, he's not just extremely competent and skillful and experienced economist. His forays into Indian spiritual texts, history, mythology, and his unparalleled proficiency and punditry in Sanskrit are also very well known. It will be a pity that we'll only be seeing one dimension of his multifaceted talents and personality, which is on the economics. There will, I'm sure, be other opportunities for you to be able to hear from him on other dimensions, on areas that he has worked on. Therefore, without much further ado, it is once again on your behalf, it's my greatest pleasure to welcome Dr. Debroy to the stage and to speak to us about the P.V. Narasimha Rao and beyond Indian economic reforms topic. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Tamil Nadu Young Thinkers Forum and IIT Madras for inviting me to speak here. I'm particularly happy that Professor Nageshwaran is here. So if there is something that I forget to address, you can always catch hold of me and you can be of him, and you can be reasonably certain that my views will not differ from his views. I'm going to speak on P.V. Narasimha Rao and beyond. And because it is a talk that's named after P.V. Narasimha Rao, I will take you back. I'm extremely conscious of the fact that the first such talk was delivered by Dr. Rangarajan, who was in the thick of things when 1991 happened. I propose to speak to you for about maybe an hour, and we will have about 15 minutes of interaction after that. In the 1 hour that I want to speak to you about, I will talk about things that are also in the past. Because what is also in the past is important to appreciate what happened in 1991. And I see a lot of young faces, and barring the first row, some of what I will tell you in the nature of the past is stuff you are not familiar with. So I will talk about the past, I will talk about the present, and I will talk about the future. So this is roughly the terrain I wish to cover in this completely unstructured talk. I used to teach once upon a time, and therefore that habit has not disappeared. Hence, whenever I have to speak, I have this tendency of taking off my watch and placing it in front of me so that I can time myself. The watch that I wear, or the watches that I wear, are all made by Titan. So one model or the other of Titan. I said I see a lot of young faces. I did not have my own watch till third year of college. When I moved into grade 9 in school, I inherited my father's discarded old HMT watch. The only watches that were then available were HMT watches. Some of you may occasionally catch hold of members of parliament to get waitlisted tickets on trains confirmed. Believe it or not, till the year 1983, MPs had a discretionary quota for allotting HMT watches, because watches were a scarce commodity. At some point, we came to Delhi. My father got transferred. We came to Delhi. And I enrolled in the Delhi School of Economics for a master's degree. It was my task to go and queue up every morning to get milk. You got a token, you queued up to get that milk. And sometimes, if you are too late, you did not get milk. In 76, I got a scholarship to go and study in Cambridge. And because I got a scholarship to go and study in Cambridge, under the Reserve Bank rules, I was entitled to get exactly 3 pounds. So my father said, how are you going to get from London, from Heathrow to Cambridge with 3 pounds? So let me try and see what we can do. We spent 7 days, 7 working days at the RBI office in Parliament Street, filling out any number of forms, and when we emerged with a license to purchase 37 pounds, we thought a big victory had been accomplished. Many, many years later, I moved to Delhi. I became a professor at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. No, but before that, these are students, what the hell, I'll tell you another story. When I was a student in Cambridge, I and a fellow student were coming back to India. We are still students, we are still on scholarships, we are coming back to India. In that day and age, you were entitled to 1 bottle of liquor. And that bottle of liquor could not be larger than 750 milliliters, not 1 liter. So my friend, who I shall not name, Anant knows him, I think he does. In those days in Southall in London, there were bottles of whiskey that specifically had dimensions of 750 liters, particularly for Indians who were going to buy the liquor and come back to India. We didn't have time, so he bought the whiskey from somewhere else. So the whiskey that he was carrying was a 1 liter bottle. Customs stopped him. That this is not permissible. It's supposed to be 750 milliliters, you're carrying 1 liter. Before customs could say anything, my friend opened the bottle, drank some of it, and said, now it's 750. There was a heated debate because by then other customs officers had been summoned. And there was a heated debate about whether 1 liter meant inside the bottle, whether or 1 liter meant including the body. I was telling you earlier that I joined the IIFT and became a professor. For about 1 year, we did not have a telephone. After 1 year, we managed to get a telephone, and telephone, for those of you who have not appreciated the fact, meant a landline. After 1 year, we got this telephone, and there was great celebration in the house. We did aarti and whatever. In those days, the telephone directory came in 2 volumes, A to M and N to Z. So after the chap who delivered the telephone, I said, the telephone directory. He looked at me, pointedly looked at my pocket. So I took out 10 rupees and gave him 10 rupees. He went down, came back with the A to M. I said, where's the other volume? He spoke in Hindi, but maybe I should not. It is being Chennai, maybe I should not speak in Hindi. He said, with 10 rupees you get only 1 volume. While I was still in IIFT, I was entrusted with a study by the Commerce Ministry to examine India's export-import policy. Now, India's export-import policy meant not only tariffs and duties, it also meant quantitative restrictions. For instance, if you are going to export pomfret, the fish, if the fish was caught in the waters of 10 different ports which were named, He could export the fish if it weighed more than 300 grams. If it was caught anywhere else, he could export it if it weighed more than 200 grams. So every time you try to export pomfret fish, customs on the basis of a sample would actually have to weigh the fish to figure out whether it weighed more than 200 grams or more than 300 grams, and then actually try to determine what waters the pomfret fish had been caught in. But the one that really puzzled me was item number 17 in a list which said exports permitted subject to a license. And item number 17 on that said cattle and other animals. Item number 17 said cattle and other animals. Item number 18 said donkeys. And I spent hours and hours trying to figure out what possible rationale there could be for donkeys being in a separate category as distinct from other animals. Soon after the reforms started, in 91, I became an economic advisor in finance ministry. And suddenly I would get files which would say I was in charge of balance of payments, and suddenly I would get a file which would say the duty drawback rate is 5.15%. It is proposed that it should be increased to 5.85%. Why was it 5.15% to start off with? Why was it going to be 5.85% now? So one day in desperation, I called the deputy economic advisor. I said, "What is this? Matthew, please explain this to me." Matthew looked at me and with a straight face he told me, "Sir, this is known as the ceiling method." I said, "What on earth is the ceiling method? Never heard of the ceiling method. I've studied econometrics. I've never heard of the ceiling method." He said, "Sir, the ceiling method is used all the time in the government. And what is the ceiling method? The ceiling method is you look at the ceiling and decide on a figure." So the economy that I've described to you was an economy of shortages. The economy I've described to you was an economy of discretion. The economy that I've described to you was of protected domestic markets. The economy that I have described to you is one where there were scarce industrial licenses that were given. There were two committees towards the end of the 1960s, the Dutt Committee and the Hazari Committee, which documented the discretion with which industrial licenses were granted. So, the domestic market was uncompetitive. Because it was protected and uncompetitive, there was no particular incentive for Indian industry to become efficient. But at the same time, you needed the foreign exchange, because you needed the foreign exchange to pay for imports of petroleum, capital goods, fertilizer, whatever else you're going to import. But there was no way this inefficient Indian industry was going to survive in the competitive export market. So you had a whole range of export incentives to ensure that that uncompetitive Indian industry could survive in the competitive international market. And this vicious cycle went on and on and on and on. Anant is absolutely right. A large number of Indian economists, even more importantly, there were a large number of government committee reports, the most important of which, in my view, was something known as the Dagley Committee on Controls and Subsidies in the year 1978, which documented the problems that this led to. Now, do not get me wrong. No one suggested for a minute that India had much of a choice necessarily in the 50s or in the 60s. But it was everyone's case that in the 70s and 80s, when it was becoming palpably obvious that the costs of the import substitution policies that had been introduced were disproportionately high compared to the benefits, when it became palpably clear that other East Asian countries, which had been worse off than India, believe it or not, in terms of all kinds of indicators, including per capita income towards the beginning of the 60s, began to outpace India, people began to argue for a change. The IMF is like a bank. If you go to a bank, you don't have to go to a bank, but if you go to a bank to borrow, the bank is going to try and make sure that you're in a position to pay. So the bank will impose conditions. If you don't like the conditions, don't go to the bank. It was clear as Anand said that we were heading towards a crisis. By about September 1990, the ingredients of what the government of India wanted to do on its own were already ready, which was more or less the same as what the IMF had suggested. At that particular point in time, there was a lot of political uncertainty, so it was left to the P.V. Narasimha Rao government to introduce these policies. You will sometimes be told there was no alternative. That's not quite true. There was always an alternative. The alternative was to impose further restrictions on imports. The alternative was to jack up the import duties. There was always an alternative. It is a different matter that the costs of that alternative would have been stupendous in terms of economic growth that was sacrificed. Hence, we had the reforms of 1991. What were those reforms? Those reforms were primarily about the external sector. They were primarily about the external sector, liberalizing quantitative restrictions on imports, liberalizing and revamping the export subsidy machinery, making the exchange rate more realistic. They were about permitting FDI and FII, and they led to whole cottage industry almost of books being written on the Indian economy. Because the Indian economy suddenly became much more interesting. Before 1991, nothing in the Indian economy changed for decades. So it was all very boring. The first 5-year plan and the 9th 5-year plan were virtually the same. So after 1991, the Indian economy, amongst other things, became a little bit more interesting. And lest you forget, India's per capita income then was $310 in 1991. What is India's per capita income today? $2,100. Well, economists have purchasing power parity kind of measures of exchange rate. Forget that, the usual official exchange rate. India's exchange rate is per capita income using official exchange rates today is $2,100. 1991, $310. Is $2,100 high or low? I don't know. How should I know? Whenever something clever is said in the area of literature, and you do not know who exactly said it, it is invariably ascribed to Oscar Wilde. Exactly similarly, in the area of economics, whenever something clever is said, and you do not know who said it, it is invariably ascribed to Lord Keynes. So Lord Keynes was once apparently asked, "How is your wife?" And he said, "Compared to whose wife?" So in that way, $2,100 is high or low, I don't know. Many things in life are relative. The richest country in the world has a per capita income of $115,000. So we've got $115 and we've got $2,100. Obviously, this is not satisfactory. In the year 1993, the IMF brought out a document. And in that document, the IMF asked a very simple question. I will state it and then I will repeat it. How many years will it take for a country like India to halve the gap in per capita incomes between India and the developed countries, assuming the developed countries do not grow? Halve the gap in income. Not eliminate it. Halve the gap in per capita incomes, assuming the developed countries do not grow but remain where they are. The answer, according to this table, was 156 years. In 156 years, certainly the first row, everyone in this auditorium, notwithstanding increases in life expectancy, will be dead. So we cannot afford to wait for 156 years. So the question to ask is, what therefore needs to be done to step up India's per capita income? What needs to be done to step up growth rates so that growth rates become 8%, 9%, 10% and even more, because there are economies in the world which have grown with that kind of rates of growth. So why cannot India replicate it? Broadly speaking, whenever one is talking about reforms, one can have the external sector in mind and one can have the domestic economy in mind. The external sector reforms which I mentioned were introduced in 1991. Do not affect directly the vast majority of the population. Domestic economic reforms are much tougher. I told you about what happened in 1991. What happened in the year 1991 was the external sector reforms, with one qualification. Who was the Prime Minister in 1991? Obvious question. Why is he asking this question? Who was the Industry Minister in 1991? What we sometimes tend to forget was P.V. Narasimha Rao was also the Industry Minister in 1991. And in 1991, other than the external sector, what was introduced was industrial delicensing. And the Prime Minister then, P.V. Narasimha Rao, consciously kept the industry portfolio with him because he was aware that the big thrust of the reforms in 1991 at least was going to be industrial delicensing. And that industrial delicensing unleashed a wave of entrepreneurship. You will be told, in 1991, the Indian economy has been liberalized. Not quite. There has been delicensing in industry. There have been incremental reforms in the financial sector. But agriculture, where about 50% of our population still earns a primary source of living, is still littered with controls. Often comparisons are made with China. In China, in the first flush of reforms in 78 or 79, the agricultural sector was the sector that was first liberalized. So today, if I look at in the Indian economy and I look at it in terms of the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector, the secondary sector has either been liberalized or is being liberalized. The services sector, depending on what particular component of the services sector, has sometimes been liberalized, sometimes we are struggling to liberalize it. And if I'm looking at the primary sector, virtually untouched. Why? Reforms are about competition. Reforms are about efficiency. If there are inefficient producers will not happily welcome competition and efficiency. So the vested interests are very strong and powerful. I told you that the reform started in 1991. In 1993, I decided to conduct an experiment. What kind of experiment? I went to CII and FICCI, ASSOCHAM and PhD, collected a list of their members. Hall of Fame of Indian industry. I drew up a list of 1,000. Year was 1993, the reforms had already been introduced. Hall of Fame of Indian industry, 1,000. Those were not the days of WhatsApp. Anand, did you mention WhatsApp? I think you did. Those were not the days of WhatsApp and email. Faxes had just come. So I wrote to these 1,000, complaining to them about irrelevant matters, trivial matters. What kind of trivial matters? Let me give an example. I wrote to Britannia and I said, I buy Bourbon cream biscuits. Half the time I find that the cream is on the wrong side. This kind of trivial complaint. I wrote to 1,000. Out of the 1,000, only 4 replied. Out of the 4 which replied, 3 said, we are very sorry to hear about your complaint. Our authorized representative will call on you soon. It has been 26 years, the authorized representative has not turned up. Out of the 1,000, only 1 turned up. In the introduction, you've been told that I work for the government. Of course I do. We moved into government housing. When we moved into government housing, I dutifully wrote to our banks. They were not public sector banks, they were private Indian banks, 3 of them, I and my wife together. Wrote to our bank saying, we have changed address. Please correct the address in our bank accounts. Bank said, where are the property documents showing that you own the house? I said, I don't own the house, it's a government quarter. Where is the tenancy deed? I said, there isn't a tenancy deed. Where are the utility bills? I said, there aren't any utility bills. The utility bills are paid by the government. This went on for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, on a Sunday evening, my wife tells me in exasperation, you are supposed to change the policies for the country. You are a member of Niti Aayog and you can't even get your bank address changed. I happen to know, obviously, the people who headed these banks, which is why I'm not mentioning them. I send them SMSs on Sunday evening. On Monday morning, their dresses were changed. You will be taught economics. You will be taught about the state versus the market. But the market functions in a certain context. When economists use the word market, it is a conceptual structure. It functions in a certain context. And the context, the laws for all of us today is the Constitution. What were the first words in the preamble to the Constitution? We, the people. Unless we, the people, decide to change India, India is not going to change. Per capita income, I mentioned earlier, in a superficial sense, per capita income is nothing but the average productivity of India's citizens. In a more specific sense, it is the average productivity of those of India's citizens who are in the productive age groups. The productivity, the average productivity of India's citizens is not going to change simply because the government suddenly waves a magic wand. It is going to change if all of us change. We, the people. One of the things that has happened with the Narendra Modi governments, the first one as well as the second one, is for the first time involve formally citizens. Whether it is the Swachh Bharat mission, whether it is the voluntary giving up of subsidies, whether it is the smart city concept, because smart cities have a template, but within that template, how you define that smart city is determined by the citizens of the city, obviously in consultation with state governments and municipal government. So if you look at the first two cities which won the competition, Bhubaneswar and Pune, you will find that the citizens of Bhubaneswar interpreted smartness in a certain way, that citizens of Pune did it in a different way. You will have heard the words governance and government. What's the difference between the two? If the two words mean the same thing, why should we use two different words? There are sophisticated definitions of the word governance emanating from the OECD, EU, World Bank. The World Bank also tries to measure governance. If you look at all of these sophisticated definitions of governance, you will discover that the critical principle which distinguishes government from governance is involvement of citizens. If we suddenly expect government, however defined, to become excellent, an island of excellence in a broader environment that does not want competition, India is not going to change. And each one of us wears two hats. One hat as a consumer, one hat as a producer. As a consumer, you will want the competition because it benefits you. But the moment it comes to your role as a producer, you will say, no, I am special. Competition is for others. I must be protected. So until that mindset changes, until citizens become involved in the governance process, India is not going to change. Government, well, what is government? I said the bedrock for everything that we do is the Constitution. In the Constitution, there are three organs of state. There is the executive, there is the legislature, and there is the judiciary. In a democracy, it is desirable that there are these checks and balances. But when you react as a citizen, and mind you, when government introduces reforms, more often than not, government reacts to pressures that come from citizens. in our indirect form of democracy indirectly. So when the Environment Protection Act was passed in 1986, it was not that suddenly government decided to pass that Environment Protection Act. The pressure came from citizens. Ditto for the Consumer Protection Act. Ditto for RTI. Ditto for other things. So the pressure has to come from citizens, articulated in an indirect democracy like ours, indirectly. Why are governments elected in the first place? Everywhere in the world, governments are elected by citizens because the primary responsibility of government is to ensure defense, external security, internal security, speed of dispute resolution, fast speed of dispute resolution, protection of property rights. This is always the primary function of government. In the introduction, Anant mentioned that I headed a project on law reforms, which I did. So this is the right time to mention Lal Bihari. Have you heard of Lal Bihari? No, you have not. I met Lal Bihari in the year 1998. Who is or was Lal Bihari? Lal Bihari was a school teacher from UP. Government school teacher from UP. He had inherited an ancestral piece of land. His maternal uncle coveted that ancestral piece of land, bribed the Tehsildar, and Lal Bihari was declared dead. So Lal Bihari was very much alive, and he fought a forlorn battle to establish that he was alive. He stood in the elections against the then Prime Minister. He went and threw stones at the police station so that the cops would arrest him. I told you he worked in a government school, so he got his wife to claim a widow's pension, to no avail. Lal Bihari remained dead. He was declared dead towards the end of the 60s. Then Lal Bihari did some research and discovered there were another 24,999 such dead people wandering around the state of UP. So he thought he would synergize their efforts, and Lal Bihari formed the Dead Man's Association. Mritak Sangh. He was the founder, president, secretary, and he changed his name to Lal Bihari Mritak. That's when I first met him. This was so bizarre a story, and all of you are smiling, but fundamentally it's a tragic story. This was so bizarre a story, I wrote about it. It was so bizarre a story that Time and Newsweek picked it up. There is a genuine prize that is awarded out of Harvard, genuine prize, known as the Ig Nobel Prize. In the year 2006, Lal Bihari was awarded the Ig Nobel Prize for Peace. And he was invited to go to Harvard and receive this prize. He could not go because the Americans wouldn't give him a visa. The Americans wouldn't give him a visa because he had no passport. He didn't have a passport because he was dead. The long and the short of it is, in 2006, Lal Bihari was finally declared alive. What about the remaining 24,999? As far as I know, they are still dead. We have a system where there are 38 million cases pending. I'm doing a back of the envelope kind of figure. It's a gross simplification, but this is just for purposes of illustration. There are civil cases, criminal cases. What I'm saying is not true equally for criminal cases, but typically a case will have two litigants, one on each side. So 38 million means, let's say 76 million. So roughly 1/3 of India's households are litigating. Roughly 1/3. As citizens, are we bothered about the judiciary? As citizens, are we bothered about the police? We are not. We expect that everything will be solved by Nirmala Sitharaman in a budget speech. Judiciary, we don't bother about. Do we bother about the legislature? We don't. Do we bother about the productivity of legislature? We don't. Did we ask questions? I said the Constitution. The Constitution has a 7th schedule. The 7th schedule has a union list for the union government. It has a state list and it has a concurrent list. Where is land? Land is in the state list. And there was a piece of legislation on land acquisition that was passed in the year 2013, which has made many infrastructure projects unviable. Today on these WhatsApp groups, you'll get messages. No one sends me WhatsApp messages. Usually they are abuse, no constructive suggestions I get on WhatsApp messages. Why doesn't the PM consult states and change that 2013 piece of legislation? Fair enough. In 2013, how many of us asked that since land is a state subject, what business did Parliament have to legislate on land? We didn't ask that question then. People will constantly say, government should spend, union government, should spend on health. Union government should spend on education. Public expenditure on education should be 6% of GDP. All right. Public expenditure on education should be 6% of GDP so that we can have more IITs amongst other things. Public expenditure on health must be 4% of GDP. 6 plus 4, 10. The Chinese are spending 15% of GDP on infrastructure. We must spend 10% at least. 10 plus 10, 20. Defense is very important, so 3% of GDP must be spent on defense. 20 plus 3, 23%. How much as citizens do we pay as taxes? Union plus state combined before GST, after GST it has dropped, before GST 17% of GDP. So we will spend 17% of GDP, but we will expect that 23% of GDP, and there are several other items I have not included. Which means either our expectations have to be tailored. We cannot want railway stations like China and airports like Western Europe and say we will not pay taxes. Or alternatively, we must be prepared to pay more as taxes, including agricultural income tax. Let me now quickly turn to the present and the 5%. The system of national income accounts was changed in January 2015. Not that the first Narendra Modi government did that, because that exercise was going on. Well, it did do that, but the exercise had been going on since 2008. As a result of which, after 2012-13, before 2011-12, you cannot drag the series back. So growth rates, quarterly growth rates, are only available from 2012-13. You cannot drag it backwards. I don't know what your teachers tell you, But what I always used to tell my students when I used to teach is, do not believe a single word that I am saying. Please go check it out for yourselves. So what I'm about to say, please go check it out for yourselves. After 2012-13, there were 2 quarters when the rate of growth had dipped below 5%. Immediate next quarter, it revived. There was 1 quarter where the quarterly rate of growth dropped to 5.3%. It revived the next quarter. So it is not as if the Indian economy is on a trend rate of growth of 5%. So this gloom and doom because of that 5% is not warranted. What is the trend rate of growth in India today? The trend rate of growth in India today means this financial year, is somewhere between 6 to 6.5%, probably closer to 6%. Where does growth come from? There are different ways economies will slice it, depending on the prism that they are wearing. One way they will slice it, if the person is a macro person, is let us look at consumption expenditure, let us look at investments, let us look at government expenditure, and let us look at net exports. In the past, India did grow at more than 9% for more than 1 year in succession. But when that happened, the external world was much kinder. Today, the external world is not that kind. It's not that favorable. So exports as things stand cannot be a major driver of growth. So the major drivers of growth will have to be consumption, investment, and government expenditure. The question to ask, and it is an important question to ask, is if you expect government, union government, to do something for consumption, to do something for investment, what you are asking, is it sector specific? Do you want government to do something specific for sectors, or do you want government to make the business climate favorable for everyone? The moment you say, I want government to do something specific for a certain sector, that specificity can only be in terms of fiscal concessions. If the template of reforms is I want to standardize, I want to remove discretion, then you cannot do things that are specific to sectors. That distorts the system. So therefore, what can government possibly do to stimulate consumption, investment, expenditure across the board? The second way economists will slice it, particularly if the person has a micro kind of prism, is to say, all right, where does growth come from? Growth comes from land, labor, capital, and the rest is productivity. So you must make land markets more efficient, you must make capital markets more efficient, we must make labor markets more efficient, and we must generally have productivity. Most of these reforms, all of these reforms, are really state subjects. Depending on the year, 90 to 95% of national income originates in states. Except for defense and railways, everything else happens in states. Make in India will not happen in Delhi. It will certainly not happen in the Lutyens' Delhi. It will happen in the states. Land, labor are state subjects. The third way to slice it is to look at something I mentioned earlier: primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. Agriculture and related, industry and related, service sector and related. And almost everything that pertains to agriculture, almost everything is a state subject again. And the fourth way is to look at the diversity among states, which is, I hope, something you will talk about tomorrow. Anything that is an average for India is an average. Averages show certain things, they also hide certain things. If you catch hold of me, put one of my feet inside a fridge and the other one inside an oven, on an average, I will be very comfortable. What the average misleads, how the average misleads, is that several states in India, particularly in the East, as a trend, not 1 year, are growing at 6% and less. If a large number of states are growing at 6% and less, or 6.5%, how do you expect the country to grow at a vastly faster rate? Once upon a time, when I was younger, I was a bit more stupid. So I used to say half the states in India are below average. And all the state chief ministers and chief secretaries got very upset. So I changed my statement to say that half the states are above average, which seemed to make everyone happy. Anant mentioned that 5 trillion target. The 5 trillion target is in dollars. India's GDP is not in dollars. India's GDP is in rupees. So a rupee figure will have to be converted to a dollar figure, which means we will have to make some assumptions about the exchange rate. And it is a nominal figure. The nominal figure is the real figure plus inflation. So you will have to make some assumptions about inflation. Depending on what kind of assumptions you make about the exchange rate and depending upon what kind of assumptions you make about inflation, it will come up with a different real rate of growth to get to that 5 trillion target. The last economic survey, which I'm sure you have not read because economic survey is generally, this one isn't, but generally economic survey is so boring that no one reads it. So the recent economic survey also has some projections, and the recent economic survey says, depending on my assumption about the exchange rate, depending on my assumption about inflation, the real rate of growth has to be 8.5%. You can have your own assumptions, sit down with your calculator or your mobile and work out your own figure, but by and large, this is the problem. This is the issue. We are on 6 to 6.5%. How do we get to 8.5%? More than that is aspirational. More than that is unlikely because the external world is not that favorable. And as I said earlier, much of that is on the states. What about the government of India? So far as the government of India is concerned, some announcements have already been made. Anant mentioned those. One of the most important announcements, and this will happen increasingly as we head towards the next budget, will be on taxation. Not just the corporate tax rate, but also on personal income tax rates. Because unincorporated enterprise also pays the same tax as the personal income tax rate. The personal income tax rate will always have some progressivity in terms of rates because that's the basic idea behind direct taxes. So quite clearly, now that new corporate enterprise has a rate of 15%, forget the surcharge, that's not relevant that much. Quite clearly, personal income tax rates are also headed downwards. Once the government is a bit more sure about revenue. On the indirect tax side, we are also headed towards standardization. But standardization means standardization. All of us as consumers want that 28% to come down to 18%. But standardization means that 0% must also come up. You cannot have it one way and not have it the other way. So far as indirect taxes are concerned, it obviously has to go through the GST Council because that's the decision-making body. What I also want to quickly mention to you is that the 15th Finance Commission will submit its recommendations at the end of November. In addition to the Finance Commission recommendations, which stipulate how much of the divisible pool of taxes is given to states and how it is distributed between states, in addition to whatever the Finance Commission does, there is additional devolution that happens through what are called the centrally sponsored schemes. The present central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, the present package, they are coterminous with the recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission. So from 1st of April 2020, we will have a new package. So we will have a completely new package of public expenditure. What that package will do depends on you as citizens. Government's responsibility is to deliver public goods and services. But government, as I mentioned earlier, has a limited kitty. There are trade-offs. When you manage your monthly budgets, you have a trade-off. Should I watch a film? Should I buy a pizza? But when it comes to government, you expect there is no trade-off. So we have to, as a collective entity, as a society, we have to decide what we want government to spend on. And most of the public goods and services are actually delivered by local bodies. How much time do you spend on state government budgets? How much time do you spend on recommendations of the state finance commissions which determine the devolution from state government to local bodies? We as citizens are also a countervailing force. And governments respond to that pressure. This economy, this society was passed on to us by our ancestors in trust. We have sometimes made a mess of it. But as I said, notwithstanding increases in life expectancy, we do not have to live that much in the future. Second row onwards, you will have to live in that future. You will have to leave that economy and society in trust for your children. Quite often, it was said about the Indian economy, the past is glorious, the future is glorious, the present is bleak. For the first time, as I travel throughout India, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Gujarat to Arunachal Pradesh, I sense a vibrant, young, entrepreneurial, turbulent, aspiring India that no longer has a chip on its shoulder about the colonial legacy and various other legacies. It is an India that's willing to go forward. And that is the reason, particularly the students, I'm confident that the present is now blurring into the future. Do not get swayed by the transitory. Since 1991, we have come a long way. In 1991, had you asked me what changes would I have seen 28 years down the line, whatever my predictions, they would have gone wrong. Today, if you ask me what is going to happen 28 years from now, all those predictions will be wrong. His fraternity, my fraternity, the economist fraternity and sorority is very good at predicting the past or interpreting the past. It is notoriously bad at predicting the future. The future is a bright one, prosperous one. It is an India about which we can be proud. It is about an economy that you can be proud about, but the path towards that economy will be shaped largely by you. Thank you very much.